Serious. People who've had to kill others in self-defense. How was it like? How's life now? And what kind of aftermath followed? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I used to drive armored trucks in a big city. I'll keep it vague for legal reasons. One day, these two guys started following the truck. They followed us all day. We called it in, but because they technically hadn't done anything wrong yet, the police couldn't do anything. So finally, I was forced to stop for fuel. That's when they hit us. My door had just opened, and I hadn't even gotten both feet on the ground when they opened up on us. I was standing sort of behind the fuel pump on the opposite side of the shooters, and the first 4 or 5 rounds from their pistols hit the pump. So I draw and immediately return fire, while the driver of my truck slams it into gear to start rolling. I grab on, and we boogie right the F out of there. I think the whole thing maybe lasted 10 seconds, maybe less time than that. I emptied my magazine at them all 16 rounds, and only hit one shooter twice. Both guys lived to flee the scene, but I found out later that the one who was wounded later died of his injuries, and as far as I feel about it, F those guys. They were going to kill me for $400 worth of change going to a convenience store. I don't feel the least bit bad about it. Throwaway, for obvious reasons. When I was about 14, one summer, my family went out to have just some time at my grandma's cabin. He was too old to go out alone now, so we had a nice place to spend summers. Grandpa had bought me a shiny new wood-cutting axe to chop wood, and I really liked it, so I carried it with me wherever I went, which was a lot of places. There were other cabins in our street, but not too many. I went exploring with my Dane Retriever mix, Pumbaa, a lot. We were in a blueberry grove, nothing but trees and bushes for a long way. I'd seen people here picking the blueberries, so I didn't think much of the scrawny older men hunched in the blueberries. It turns out he was setting a bear trap. He was a poacher, and there was a lot of black bears in the area. He saw me and charged me immediately. He had a machete and was screaming at the top of his lungs about me not supposed to have been there. I let go of Pumbaa, and he attacked the man, got him down on the ground, but with the wrong arm. Pumbaa was trying to protect me, but the poacher was hurting him with a machete. I barely registered running to help him. I had my axe, and I swung it down as hard as I could at him when he got on top of my dog. I ended up hitting the back of his neck. There wasn't any blood, but I felt something give under the hit. He just kind of fell over, but Pumbaa was hurt bad. I just remember there being so much blood, and I had to carry him back home sobbing to my grandpa. Pumbaa lived, thankfully, though he never was able to run again. They found the poacher dead. I found out later I had shattered a vertebrae in his neck and pinched several nerves, and he just stopped functioning. There wasn't a trial or a hearing or anything. The man had violence-based priors, and I got about a month in juvenile mental wellness holding. I was told he didn't have family, but I don't think about it anymore. My parents refused therapy, and I learned to accept that what happened on my own. Pumbaa has since passed away of old age, but he was a brave dog who saw me through a lot before and after this had happened. Throwaway, because people know my Reddit stuff, and I'm not interested in this really being a thing in my current circles. Some years ago, 3 men broke into our home in the middle of the night and started going through all of our shit. One of them must have knocked something over, which woke me up to hear them talking downstairs. I yelled out that the police were on their way, wife was calling at the same time, and that I was armed. I don't know exactly what they wanted, but 2 of them came upstairs, moving towards the bedroom where we were holed up, and I wasn't taking any chances. It was dark in the hallway, but I knew that it wasn't anybody I knew, so I fired a bunch of times down the narrow hallway. They both probably died instantly or bled out very quickly, I'm not sure. I was more or less deaf after the gunfire, so I don't know if there were any sounds. Turns out, neither of the 2 were armed. There was no legal aftermath. We lived in a castle doctrine state at the time, so there was no charge on my part. They picked up the last guy close by with things from our house and a gun. He was charged with felony murder for the participation. He took some kind of deal that got him 30 plus, I think, which also meant that I didn't have to testify. I wasn't really interested in that part. I was offered some counseling, which I took up, but I didn't feel that I needed it, so I stopped going after a few sessions. I'm fine with it. I wish I hadn't been in the situation, but I don't regret what I did. I wouldn't kill a person for my TV, but I also won't risk the safety of my wife or myself. Life is the same as before. After firing, I remember feeling relief and that my initial fear completely vanished. Sort of a, was that really it moment? I don't know. Honestly, the most surprising thing in the case was that my homeowner's insurance didn't want to cover the cost of the shot-up hallway and bloody floor. The police sent someone to clean up the once liquid blood, but it had gone through the untreated floorboards and made a huge stain on the kitchen ceiling below. We had to replace the whole thing, which was a huge pain in the ass. The metallic smell was awful until it was all taken care of. Smelled a little bit like a butcher shop. Nearly 25 years ago, I was living at my parents' old 2-story house in the middle of farmland in Florida. They had both moved to a bigger city and were still trying to sell the old farmhouse. I was 20 and too old to move with my parents to their new place, so they let me stay at their house by myself until they sold it. This allowed me to finish college and save the money I made at my PT job. It was about my 3rd month being there alone. The closest other house was my uncle's house about 3 miles away. The closest town was a tiny town a little over 10 miles away. It was about 11:30 p.m. and I was reading in my bed, parents' old bed, upstairs, and I heard a loud banging on the door. I walked out of the room and looked over the balcony at the front door and saw someone staring up at me through one of the side stained glass panes. It was a man in his 30s. I've never felt such a surge of panic. I called my uncle and it rang and rang. I grabbed the .357 Magnum that my dad had left for me and told me a billion times to keep close to me at all times, and I called 911. Once the dispatch operator was on the phone with me, the guy was kicking at the door. One loud kick every 10 seconds. The 911 dispatcher told me someone would be there in less than 5 minutes and advised me to tell her which room I was in. I was terrified, and I could hear the door starting to crack. I put the phone down and cocked the .357 Magnum and stayed at the top of the stairs, small winding staircase. He kept kicking, and as the door was about to give way, he looked through the stained glass window again, right at me. I pointed the gun at him, and he made this expression that I can only describe as excitement. He kicked, and the door gave way and slammed open and broke the window pane. He ran up the stairs. As he took the first 2 steps, I stood up and shot him right in the stomach. He yelled and fell back and hit the foyer floor and started moaning nonstop, writhing. I stood like a statue with the gun pointed at him until the cops arrived. When the first officer entered the front door, I pointed the gun at him and he screamed at me to drop it. For some reason, I'd lowered the gun but couldn't let it go. He said that everything was going to be okay, but I had to let go of the gun. A few minutes later, an ambulance pulled up, and for some reason, it wasn't until I saw paramedics that I put the gun down and started crying. The man died en route to the ER that night. The officers told me he had a rap sheet a mile long. He also had a .45 gun in his glove compartment. They took me to the police station, and my parents drove back that night and took me to their new home. The house sold a month later, and I never stayed there alone again. My uncle was gone for the night to visit his other farmlands in Okeechobee. I don't really ever think about this event anymore. It takes a specific inquiry for me to remember it. I now have a concealed carry .38 special that I always keep in my purse, and I would never give that up. I was 17. My parents had gone out for the night, so I was home with my little sister, 5 at the time. A man broke into our house around 11 p.m. I heard the glass breaking when he busted one of our windows. My first thought was to protect my sister, so I made her hide in the closet in my room. I gave her my cell phone and told her to call 911. We were watching a movie at the time, so the TV was on, but most of the lights in the house were off. I could hear him moving around in the living room on the other side of the house from my room. I was able to sneak into my parents' room and grab my dad's rifle. When I stepped back in the hallway, he saw me. I shouted that the police were coming and that I was armed, so he better leave. It was obvious in my voice cracking that I was terrified. He laughed at me, and then he charged. I shot him twice in the chest. I kept the gun on him as I walked over to his body to kick away any weapons he had. He was completely unarmed. I think he only had intended to rob our home, and had I hidden with my sister, he might not have ever known we were there. The police arrived a few minutes after he died. I just watched him the whole time, and I remember the movie was still playing in the background. I don't feel sorry for that man, and I don't regret what I did. Not sure if it was accidental, but while in college in my first apartment, I came home from work at 3 a.m. Some dude was in the hallway outside my door, and I had a bad feeling about it. I paused and went to get the mail, hoping he would leave. Nope. I come back and he is waiting at my door. I asked him what was up, and he said he was looking for John. My name is not John, mine is, and I lived alone. I asked him to move and let me in the door. He told me to F off and get John. I slid between him and the door, opened it, and he pushed his way in. I pushed him out. He took a swing at me. I swung back, hitting him in the eye, which caused him to fall back and hit his head. Out cold. Forever. Apparently, John was the guy who lived in the apartment before me. The dead guy spent 5 years in jail because of John ratting him out for drugs. Dead guy came to get revenge, ended up getting dead. Throwaway for obvious reasons. A few years ago, I was home from college for a weekend and was, sitting on Reddit on my computer in my room. My parents have a 2-story house with a balcony looking over the front door area of the inside. I thought I heard a weird sound from downstairs, so I sat still and listened. Then I heard a window shatter and voices. I had just recently bought a pistol since I was the only person I knew who didn't own a gun. I grabbed it out of my sock drawer and quietly walked over to the balcony. I definitely heard voices I didn't recognize. I quietly walked back in my room and called 911. I told them what was going on and that I was armed. They told me to stay in my room and lock the door. I then heard my mother scream downstairs. F. I thought she was still out with her friends. I didn't hear her come home. I dropped my phone and ran downstairs. I found 3 guys in the living room. All 3 were facing away from me, and one was trying to open my mother's bedroom. The one had a shotgun. I honestly had no idea what to do. I'd rehearsed the situation before in my head, but actually having it happen was completely different. I could hear my mother screaming from in her room, and my hands were shaking. It was like I wasn't actually there, just along for a wild ride. I opened fire on the one by the bedroom door. He went completely limp and crumpled. I figured he was done for now, so I turned and shot at the 2 guys in the living room. I hit one in the leg while they were trying to get back out the glass door they broke in through. I chased the 2 into the backyard and tried to keep shooting, but only managed to get off 1 shot because I'd run out of bullets by that point. I ran back inside and went to my mom's bedroom. The guy was still sitting there all crumpled, but I didn't know if he was still a threat, so I kicked him in the head and he fell over. I took his gun. Then I convinced my mom to let me inside the room. We stayed there for what felt like hours, though it was only a few minutes before the police came and cleared the house. They found the other guy in a neighboring city at the hospital. The staff called police when a guy came in with a gunshot wound. Thankfully, I live in Texas, where there is a castle doctrine, and there was never any question as to whether I was in the right or wrong. I honestly have never felt bad for what I had to do. I felt bad for kicking a guy who turned out to be already dead, but still, I'd do it all over again if I had to. I'm more protective of my mom, and after graduating college, I moved back in for a while. My mom had no idea I even owned a gun. She's always been afraid of them, but she's learning how to use them and getting more comfortable with them. I was bouncing in a bar in Florida when a fight broke out on the dance floor. I stepped in between the 2 guys to break things up. As I had one guy backing off, the other started pounding on me. I was able to get behind the guy and wrap my arms around him. He wiggled enough to where my arms got around his neck. He'd kept jerking, and I heard a snap and released. He was gone. Life since then has been a series of ups and downs. I've since left the bar and club scene. That day will haunt me for the rest of my life. Damn. My wife and I had just moved into a new house in a developing neighborhood on the east side of Atlanta. We were in bed when I heard glass break and the downstairs door open. I immediately got up and grabbed my shotgun, and I told Emily to go hide in the closet and call the police. I slowly opened the door to our room and creeped to the landing. I could hear them downstairs. I yelled that I was armed, and if they did not drop my things and leave after I counted to 10, I would shoot. I pumped the shotgun and turned on the lights as if I was counting. I got to 9 when one of the robbers walked into the foyer and started drawing something from his pants, so I shot him. He hit my front door and slumped. His accomplice took off to their car, which the police found out to be stolen. I did not get in any legal trouble, and the 2 men were gang affiliated. I felt awful for having to shoot, but I was not going to let them hurt my family or get off the hook so easily for stealing my things. I've been through counseling, and I even went so far as to track down the mother of the man who I killed to apologize to her for taking her son's life. She did not blame me and said that the Lord has his ways in life and that her son chose the wrong path. In high school, I intervened when somebody attacked one of my friends with a knife. This guy and two friends cut through the campus for some reason and threatened several people with a knife. The school called the police, but my friends and I were totally unaware. We had planned on meeting in the student parking lot behind the stadium. When I got there, I saw this guy swing a knife at my friends. He had driven them back against the stadium perimeter fence by the time I got there. I ran up and shoved him, and he turned and swung at me. The first swing wasn't even close. The second one got me. I stepped in to grab him to take him down. He stepped in swinging the knife at my head. I deflected the shot and got stabbed in the shoulder before I took him down. I kneed him in the gut, and when he was doubled over, I picked him up and slammed him head first into the concrete. What I remember is the sound of his skull cracking. I can't describe it, and I will never forget it. He got me in the crease where my shoulder and back come together to form my left armpit. The surgeon said that if the knife had come half an inch lower, rather than sticking it in my shoulder, it would have severed all the veins under my arm and I would have bled out in the parking lot. I couldn't feel anything in my arm for a long time afterwards. The cops saw the entire fight unfold. They got there just as I was about to stomp on his head and knocked me away from him. The knife was stuck in my shoulder, and one of the cops pulled it out. My friends and I gave statements in the hospital to the responding officer and a detective. Nobody ever mentioned it to me again. I never asked what happened to him, and I don't really know. The detective called my dad that night, and I've always assumed it was to tell him that the guy died. It had to be a bad day for my dad, coming within half an inch of losing a child, and then learning that that child had taken a life. This was just a few years after his tour in Vietnam. It had to bring back some bad memories. It was 38 years ago, last March. I'll keep it short. I live in South Africa. We had an attempted hijacking while we were arriving home. I'm always armed and on alert because this happens often. Anyway, as the guy came towards the car, I already knew what was about to happen. My gun is always in the door pocket. As he got to the window, I shot him. He died later. His accomplices drove off. I never lost so much as a minute of sleep. My wife, however, who was in the back seat with my daughter, was completely traumatized and still isn't over it.